There exist souls who embrace anguish as if it were their divine calling, not from necessity, but because somewhere in the depths of their being, they have learned to believe that suffering validates their existence. I have encountered countless empaths who do not flee from shadows, they welcome them. They do not avert their gaze from fracture, they present themselves as the mending. But this is perilous territory. When you conflate anguish with significance, you entomb your authentic self beneath the traumas of others. Today, I must illuminate this distinction before your calling becomes your cage. You have arrived to listen not merely with your conscious mind, but with your essence. Therefore, I shall address that most sacred chamber within you, where the primordial patterns stir, where the symbolic visions ascend like vapor from an eternal flame. In our exploration today, let us traverse the psychological landscape of the empath, not as casual observers, but as those who understand that beneath the surface lies not only decay but revelation, legend, and the forgotten deity who continues to murmur through your anguish. The sculpted empath, blessing and burden. The empath, those beings who so frequently mistake the world's suffering for their own, are not simply born into this role. They are sculpted. They emerge like steel hammered in the unconscious forge of countless inherited wounds. Their heightened perception is not merely a blessing. It is both curse and destiny, a weight they mistake for righteousness. This is where we must commence, not with romanticism, but with unflinching truth. Suffering is not always significance. When I speak these words, I do not suggest that anguish lacks meaning. Quite the opposite. Pain is the raw material of metamorphosis. But there lurks a hidden peril when the empath, in their unreflective state, assumes their suffering is sacred merely because it exists. What remains unconscious within you will manifest in the world as destiny. So many empaths exist in perpetual cycles of absorbing wounds, hemorrhaging internally while maintaining outer composure, convinced their anguish is their vocation. This is not individuation. This is captivity. The empath, when undeveloped, remains possessed by the great mother archetype, the nurturing force that both sustains and consumes. The caring principle, when divorced from consciousness, becomes a despot clothed in gentleness. The empath gives ceaselessly, not from wholeness but from emptiness. In giving, they hope to be replenished. Yet the unconscious does not reward this approach. It demands confrontation. It requires descent into one's own abyss to examine the inherited narratives that whisper of martyrdom and disgrace. Still, the unconscious is patient. It will wait generation after generation until the empath crumbles, not from absence of love, but from absence of limits. Their energetic field becomes absorptive. They experience others' sorrow as their own, mistaking resonance for obligation. They confuse identification with compassion. They witness someone drowning and leap into the depths without recognizing that neither possesses the ability to swim. This delusion, this conflation of pain and purpose, is nourished by collective complexes. Our society sanctifies suffering. It proclaims that those who endure most are somehow most virtuous. But virtue without awareness is merely a facade worn by the wounded child still seeking approval from a long-departed parent. The empath wears this mask so convincingly that even they believe it. Yet, what they truly require is not more sensation. It is to feel what authentically belongs to them. The unconscious will inundate a fragile ego with experience to awaken it. The empath is flooded not because they are blessed, but because they have not individuated. Their boundaries remain permeable. The persona they present is that of the helper, the healer, the saint. But the shadow whispers of bitterness, weariness, fury. It speaks truth. I am exhausted from feeling for everyone else. This truth, though buried, will emerge. It always does. I once studied a woman who could not enter a space without absorbing the emotional atmospheres of those present. She took pride in this capacity, naming it her empathic gift. But through our work, we excavated a childhood where she was rewarded for attunement to her mother's temperament, punished if she failed to anticipate the storm. She learned survival through fusion, not autonomy. Now, as an adult, she continued surviving through merger rather than freedom. Her pain had become her navigation system. Every wound in existence called to her like an enchantment. But this is not purpose. This is conditioning. This is trauma masquerading as compassion. Until recognized, it governs the soul. The path forward is not to cease feeling, but to differentiate, to inquire, is this mine? Does this anguish belong to my soul's journey? Or have I collected it like debris placed in my path by another's sorrow? The unconscious is a shapeshifter. It communicates through enigmas, through projections, through visions. It will reveal your wound by clothing it in another's countenance. But do not be misled. Every face you yearn to heal is a reflection. Every ache you pursue is your own, beckoning to you in disguise. The work is not to carry more. The work is to discern. Empathy must unite with wisdom. Otherwise, the empath becomes the fool rushing into infernos to rescue phantoms. Many do this because feeling is simpler than asking, why do I need to feel this to feel alive? That is the question that shatters the enchantment. Let us now descend further. Let us speak of dreams. The dream realm of the empath is scattered with symbols of merger, water, waves, deluges, always submersion. The dreamer frequently finds themselves drowning or attempting to rescue someone from drowning. These are not idle metaphors. They are psychic warnings. The water represents the collective unconscious, and the dreamer is overwhelmed not by their own essence, but by the unlived existences of others. This is the price of psychic porosity. It is not sanctity, it is powerlessness. But when the dream transforms, when the water becomes a stream and the dreamer discovers a vessel, then we know the ego is beginning to cohere. Then we know the empath is beginning to separate, to individuate. They are learning to navigate the currents rather than be devoured by them. This marks the beginning of transformation. The journey of the empath who begins questioning is sacred, for it is the moment the self starts awakening from the spell of projection. No longer content to serve as the silent receptacle of collective anguish, the empath begins wondering, what if my suffering is not a divine signal, but an ancestral echo? This is the threshold. It is narrow, quivering, and solitary. To cross it means stepping away from the applause of self-sacrifice into the solitude of self-knowledge. At this stage, the unconscious may resist. The ego, once passive and powerless, begins asserting itself. With this comes terror. Am I becoming selfish? No, you are becoming sovereign. The self must reclaim its authority from the tyranny of others' expectations. The empath begins recognizing that not all feelings are directives, and not all wounds require intervention. Some are invitations to observe, to witness, to learn, but not to carry. Here emerges the archetype of the wounded healer, not as myth from ancient texts, but as living pattern within the soul. The wounded healer does not heal by absorbing suffering, but by transforming their own. Chiron, the centaur who could not heal his own wound, teaches us that insight arrives through the liminality of our injury. But insight is not identity. The empath who adopts pain as identity sacrifices transformation for martyrdom. They remain pierced, but never kindle the alchemical fire. Do you comprehend what I mean by alchemical fire? It is the symbolic flame that burns away illusion, but only if one has courage to remain within it, to hold the pain not as a cross to bear eternally, but as a crucible, to let it burn and observe what emerges, not the same self, not the same story, but something stranger, more complete, more dangerous in its authenticity. This is the shadow-integrated empath, the one who no longer reacts but responds, no longer absorbs but reflects. Let me share a dream, not mine, but one offered by a patient in profound despair. She dreamed she stood in a cathedral constructed of glass. Each time someone nearby wept, the walls would fracture. She ran endlessly from chamber to chamber, sealing the breaks with her own blood. Upon waking, she wept, believing this her holy calling. When we explored deeper, I asked, "Whose cathedral are you protecting, and why must your blood serve as mortar?" She fell silent. That silence became the beginning of her rebirth. This dream is archetypal. The cathedral represents the collective ideal. The empathic woman lives to preserve it. Peace, harmony, connection. But she does so at her own expense. Her blood is not symbolic healing, it is depletion. The cracks are not problems to fix, but revelations to face. The cathedral must shatter for the inner temple to emerge. There is a moment in the individuation process when the empath realizes they are not here to save others from their pain. They are here to witness the birth of their own self through that very pain. This is no small task. It demands withdrawing the projection of purpose from suffering, seeing pain not as proof of goodness, but as a call to examine the unconscious contract you have signed. Who taught you that your hurt makes you holy? Who convinced you that to be loved, you must bleed? These questions are surgical. They open what the false self has sutured closed, but in their asking, they reveal the inner orphan, the psychic child who made a bargain long ago. If I feel for everyone else, perhaps someone will finally feel for me. This is not empathy. This is abandonment disguised as care. To integrate this truth is devastating. Yet it is also liberation. You begin discerning that boundaries are not walls. They are riverbanks. They give shape to the flow of your soul. You begin recognizing that love without discernment is possession, that feeling everything is not a spiritual gift. It is spiritual bypassing, a refusal to descend into the underworld of your own unique becoming. For the empath must enter their own darkness, or they will forever be ruled by the darkness of others. Now let us consider the myth of Persephone. Abducted into the underworld, she becomes queen not by resisting Hades, but by eating the pomegranate, by choosing to partake. This is what the empath must do. Not resist the underworld, but enter it consciously. Choose to feel what is theirs and leave the rest behind. Only then can they return to the upper world bearing the seeds of truth. The empath who begins individuating often experiences terrifying emptiness. What remains when one stops absorbing? What exists when one no longer serves as the sponge of the collective? In that silence, the soul is revealed. It is not loud, it is not grandiose, it does not demand recognition. It speaks in stillness, and in its voice, the true calling of the empath is found, not to absorb, but to transmute, not to feel for others, but to feel with wisdom, and sometimes to feel nothing at all. Can you accept that? That not every emotion must be yours? That detachment is not cruelty, but clarity? That the most loving thing you can do is let another walk their own path, even into pain, even into loss, because only there will their own soul rise to meet them. This is the sacred detachment of the healed empath. They are no longer seeking to be loved through service. They have retrieved the projection of their worth from the altar of others' emotions. They no longer mistake the trembling of their body as divine instruction. They ask always, "What is mine?" And if the answer is silence, they honor that. In this space, the archetype of the magician begins stirring. The magician is not concerned with suffering for suffering's sake. He transmutes. He works with symbol, with energy, with dream. The healed empath, now touched by the magician, becomes a channel, not a container. The pain passes through but does not remain. The emotion flows but is not housed. This is true psychic hygiene, and it is sacred. Now we arrive at a paradox. The empath who ceases identifying with pain becomes more truly empathic. Strange, is not it? For in relinquishing the addiction to suffering, they become capable of true compassion, rooted not in need but in presence. They see pain and no longer rush to fix. They feel pain and no longer confuse it with moral superiority. They can sit in the company of sorrow without becoming it. This is the strength of the differentiated self. This is psychic maturity. Let us now pause to examine the dream work of the transformed empath. Whereas before their dreams were floods, drownings, and collapsing structures, now they begin dreaming of doorways, of keys, of chambers previously locked. These symbols do not arise by chance. They are the language of the unconscious, signaling movement into new psychic territory. To dream of finding a key beneath one's tongue reveals the power of one's own voice reclaimed. To dream of walking a path alone without fear signals the emerging autonomy of the self. The inner architecture of the empath is shifting. Where once there was absorption, now there is discernment. Where once there was fusion, now there is dialogue. The unconscious is no longer erupting in desperate tempests, but responding to the empath's conscious inquiry. This is no small achievement. It is the fruit of the long interior journey through shadow, through myth, through wound. Yet the process is never complete. We are never fully healed. We are ever becoming. The danger lies in mistaking awakening for arrival. The hero archetype may appear at this stage, seductive in its promises. You've conquered your shadow. Now go and heal the world. But beware, the hero's path, when unbalanced, feeds the ego's need to be needed. The healed empath must resist the call to conquer. Instead, they must become the witness, the one who sees, who holds space, who neither absorbs nor abandons. The witness archetype is quieter. It does not demand recognition. It listens more than it speaks. It is here that true influence begins. Now you may ask, if I am no longer here to feel everything, what is my purpose? This is the most sacred question of all, because purpose does not arrive through pain. It arrives through pattern. You must look to the repeating motifs in your life, the conversations you are drawn into, the themes that haunt your dreams, the fears that follow you like shadows at noon. These are not accidents. They are psychic threads waiting to be woven. I urge you, trace them, map them, dialogue with them. Your purpose is not a task. It is a symbolic unfolding. The empath's mistake is seeking meaning in affliction. But meaning is not something you find. It is something you create through conscious engagement with the symbols of your own life, through synthesis of your wound, not glorification of it. Let me share another case. A man who had spent decades in spiritual communities, revered as a gifted intuitive. He could sense others' emotions like wind on his skin, but he was chronically ill, chronically fatigued, and secretly resentful of the very people he helped. They drained me, he confessed, but I can't stop. When we excavated his dream work, we found a recurring motif. A glass house filled with strangers, all holding mirrors, all pointing them at him. He would scream but make no sound. The mirrors, I told him, are the projections of others. You live in a house of reflections, but you've forgotten your own image. Your gift became a prison because you never asked why you had to use it. What if you could feel without fusing? What if you could help without hosting their pain inside your body? He began weeping, not from despair, but from relief. The psychic contract was dissolving. Empaths often confuse availability with love, but availability without boundaries is self-erasure. The ego must become solid enough to choose when to feel and when to rest, when to engage, and when to walk away. This is not coldness, it is compassion with roots. A tree that cannot hold its own shape cannot shelter anyone. This brings us to the image of the tree of life. In many traditions, it is the axis mundi, the bridge between worlds. It draws from the underworld, stretches to the heavens, but is rooted firmly in earth. The empath must become such a tree, deeply rooted, or else they are toppled by every storm of feeling. They must draw from their own well, not steal water from others' sorrows. Only then can they offer true shelter. Only then are they not rescuers, but guides. In dream symbology, a tree bearing fruit often appears after long periods of psychic drought. This is a sign of integration. The self is no longer split between "I feel for you" and "I do not exist." There is now a third stance. I exist with you, but not as you. This is the posture of true empathy, and it is learned only through the fire of unlearning. So let us unlearn. Let us unlearn the lies that feeling everything makes you holy. Let us unlearn the belief that goodness requires wounding. Let us unlearn the collective myth that the suffering servant is the highest archetype of love. There are other archetypes: the weaver, the priestess, the alchemist, the sage. They do not bleed to prove their virtue. They see, they sense, they speak in symbols, and they serve without self-sacrifice. This is the future of the empath. This is their true initiation, but it cannot be done alone. You must have witnesses. You must have mirrors who do not distort you. You must find those rare few who do not reward you for hurting but for healing, who do not measure your worth by how broken you are willing to be for them. These are your true tribe, not the ones who praise your sensitivity, but the ones who protect your becoming. They do not worship your pain, they honor your emergence. Most importantly, you must become that witness for yourself, to see your own wound without collapsing into it, to tend your own ache without needing it to define you, to look in the mirror and say, "I am here. I am whole. I do not need to suffer to shine." There is a silence that comes after the storm, not the silence of numbness, but of clarity. The empath, having descended into the archetypal night and wrestled with the illusion that pain equals purpose, now emerges as something else. Not hardened, but defined. Not detached, but distinct. They are no longer the open wound. They are the scar that sings. In this stage, the dream world changes yet again. Water becomes light. The empath may now dream of guiding others across bridges, of holding lanterns in vast caverns, of touching strangers without being consumed. These are not symbols of martyrdom. They are signs of psychic sovereignty. The self no longer needs to drown to prove its depth. It no longer bleeds to prove it cares. The light has entered the wound, not to erase it, but to make it conscious. And this consciousness ripples outward. The healed empath does not preach, they emanate. Their energy no longer begs to be needed. It offers presence without persuasion. They do not rescue, but they resonate. This resonance draws forth only those who are ready, not to be saved, but to awaken. They become, in mythic terms, the sacred mirror, not the one who reflects others in place of themselves, but the one who reflects others to themselves. They no longer distort to please. They clarify to liberate. In doing so, they begin seeing that what they mistook for divine burden was always a threshold. Purpose is not found in pain. It is found in what you do with pain, in what you shape from it. The empath who creates through art, word, ritual, presence transmutes their suffering into symbol. Symbol is the bridge between personal and collective. Symbol is what heals. I knew a woman once who wrote poetry that made the bones of the forgotten ache. When I asked her where it came from, she said, "From the ache I no longer carry." Her words did not plead, they illuminated. That is the difference between the empath in bondage and the empath in bloom. One recites their wounds, the other offers what bloomed through them: death, rebirth, and the sage within. This blooming requires death, the death of the identity built around feeling everything, the death of the savior persona, the death of the false humility that hides a desperate need for meaning. Death, as in all myths, is followed by rebirth. But the reborn empath is almost unrecognizable. They smile less often, but more truly. They say no without guilt. They listen without absorbing. They walk alone, not from exile, but from choice. Their dreams now feature thresholds, keys, fire that warms but does not burn. They begin writing their own mythology, not a script of inherited martyrdom, but of emergence. They stop asking, "What do others feel?" and begin asking, "What is true?" Sometimes the truth is still painful, but it is theirs, and that makes all the difference. At this stage, the sage archetype may appear, not as an old man with books, but as quiet knowing. The sage within the empath does not scream to be heard. It waits. It watches. It only speaks when words build bridges, not chains. The sage carries a lantern, yes, but not to guide others out, to remind them they carry their own. Now let me speak directly to you. Yes, you who have felt too much, too often, for too long. You who were praised for your empathy but never taught to wield it. You who confuse exhaustion with virtue, sadness with spirituality, merging with love. You are not here to carry the pain of the world. You are here to transform it. Transformation begins with claiming what is yours and releasing what is not. You must let the river run through you, not drown you. You must learn to walk beside the hurting, not collapse with them. You must become the stone in the stream, not unmoved, but unmoving in your essence. That essence is not your pain, it is your pattern. Your pattern is how your soul folds into the fabric of this world. It is in the way you love, not bleed, in the way you see, not absorb, in the way you hold space, not hold weight. This is your gift, not to feel everything, but to feel what is true. Not to save everyone, but to stand so fully in your being that others remember how to stand in theirs. Not to suffer for meaning, but to make meaning from suffering. This is individuation. This is alchemy. This is the empath who no longer mistakes pain for purpose. The final dream is often one of flying. Not away, but through. Wings of gold, often heavy at first, but finally light as breath. The flight is not escape, it is emergence. The air is not distance, it is clarity. So I leave you with this. May your wings be strong, not from bearing weight, but from knowing when to let go. May your gift not be your pain, but what you make of it. May you remember that feeling deeply is not your burden. It is your raw material. It is not your identity. It is your invitation.